Hey man, how you doing?
That's good. We're on our walk.
Uh-oh. You finished Bava Kama?
No, this way I'm trying to just do a Mishnah whenever I have a second.
Yeah.
But I brought the Mai and Bava Kama.
What's that?
The Mai and Bava Kama. And I, before coming here, looked up where it talks about Yonam. It looks like with the Mai, it repeated multiple times that like there's an established price.
Okay. Well, you remember this mimer?
What's this one? Yeah,
We learned it at Bazaar.
yeah, I remember.
Okay.
This is the regular stuff.
Yeah. So I printed out I copied this whole thing from this book. This book is I don't know, I'm not crazy about it. It has some nice elements to it. Some of it's kind of hokey. You'll notice at the top it'll say day 1 or day 7 or anything like that. Don't get distracted with that. It's like the whole book is set up in this way that it's a 30-day program of meditation. Okay, so I printed it out from the beginning. this is only the beginning of the mimer. I didn't print the whole thing. It's like 80 pages. So we'll work with this for now, and we will and we'll go through it and start to see. So if everybody remembers, we contrasted this with the last mimer that we learned, with the last discourse that we looked at, that we're looking at the same verse and a totally different concept, a totally different discussion on the same verse that we learned in the previous discourse. The verse says, "Vayada'ata that you shall know today and take unto your heart that Havaya, that Yud Kei Vav Kei, that Adonai is who Elohim, his God." Right, and this connection, this refrain of Hashem and Elohim, and the various different permutations of the two of them are all over Torah, are all over Jewish prayer, are all over our conversations and the way we conceive of a conversation with and about God. So whereas the last mimer, the last discourse, we were looking at the interplay between knowledge and faith, right? This one, hold on one second. Morning. Okay, so this one is looking at these two names of God, Havaya and Elohim, Hashem and Elohim. So far we started asking a couple of questions, and we sort of set the baseline. We're on the second page, which the page number is 75. We started setting the sort of setting up the conversation to say that we have these two names that classically seem to indicate the opposite. This concept of Havaya. Havaya is Yud Kei Vav Kei is the same, this 4-letter name of God, and Havaya is the terminology that the Kabbalists typically employ, which is connected with or sort of hints at this idea of existence. Havaya means is a Hebrew word connected with the word to be, the word to exist. It's sort of like isness, and so because we don't say the 4-letter name of God, so typically a lot of times we'll say Hashem. So the Kabbalists wanted to be extra mystical about it, so they came up with this term of Havaya, which is also a permutation and sort of hints to the same thing. So we have Havaya and Elohim, Elohim being the other word for God. So the Zohar tells us Havaya and Elohim kul echad, that they are one. They are one and the same. They are totally they express the same truth. And yet at the same time, our baseline understanding, the reason why this is even a conversation is because we know that they're in some ways opposite. They in some ways indicate the opposite, right? Havaya, Yud Kei Vav Kei, is all about God as this sort of, as this revelation, and Elohim is a concealment, right? Elohim, we know, has the same numerical value as Hatava, as nature, the ways in which godliness is concealed. And God, as being God, is all about revealing God, right? It's all about the ways in which God comes and presents himself as a revelation. So they would seem to be opposite. So that's the conversation that we're having. We continue. I'm just trying to find exactly where we're holding in the mimer from last time. But so we said that on page 76, we further unfold this idea by saying that on the one hand, Havaya is connected with chesed being kindness, the sphere of kindness or giving, whereas Elohim is the sphere of din, of restraint or of concealment of discipline. Right, in Kabbalah, we have these 10 spheres of through which God manifests himself, through which God expresses himself, through which God relates to the other, relates to creation. And we operate in those 10 spheres as well. We express ourselves through those 10 spheres as well. So there is the element that we perceive of as kindness, as giving, and then there's the opposite element, which would be the element of restraint, of discipline. So we said, where did we get to? So then we gave the analogy about light. We started talking about light. Let's just pick up here. We're on page 90. So, like I mentioned, because this book adds a lot of conversation and a lot of like ideas for meditation and stuff. So the page numbers are kind of wacky. It's the fourth page, the third page in the packet. On the bottom left-hand corner, it says page 90. Okay. So he says, so we're talking about light and vessels, right? That was the other way that we understood this. This was the last thing that we left off with, was to say that there's light and there's vessels, right? That there is the light in its sort of abstract form, and then there's the vessel, the way in which it is revealed, the way in which it is given some directionality. Everything, Kabbalah likes these dichotomies, likes these sort of these juxtapositions to play with something like light and a vessel. The light is abstract, and the vessel gives it something concrete. We're going to break down both what light is and what the vessel is and how they interplay with each other. Okay. So on the top of page 90, Kabbalah, Shem Havayahu Mokar Ha'eres, Shem Elikim Mokar HaKelim. So Havaya tells us about, in the same way that it's about light, right? It's about giving, it's about effusing, it's about putting out. So Havaya is connected with light. The Elikim, the constraint, the restraint, the discipline, the containing, that's Elikim, that's the vessels. So light, we say, generally is totally unlimited, right? Light is without division. Light is simple and pure in its expression. Because light is merely an expression of the luminary, right? The light is not an existence unto itself, but rather an extension of that which is illuminating. So it contains all the same properties of the luminary, and this is a conversation that we're going to get into a lot of depth about. So since in this case, the luminary is God, right? The luminary is God's essence. So therefore, just like God's essence is totally simple, is not, when we say simple, we mean that it's not comprised of multiple components, right? It's singular. It is unified. Well, no, it's singular in not being a composition and not being a composite. So, and it is totally infinite in its essence. So too, what it presents itself as, the revelation that extends out of it, the light that extends off of it, all of that contains the same elements to say that it is also unlimited. So it is totally unlimited, totally singular. Shem Elikim. So that's all on the Havaya side of things. Shem Elikim hu mokar HaKelim, but Elikim is the source of all concealment. Elikim is the source of the vessels which are able to constrain, which are able to contain, which are able to direct and to give dimension and quality to. So it is the function of Elikim, wherein we develop the distinctions that the light can be broken up and that we can identify certain elements to it, right? Like a prism, that when the light goes through a prism, what comes out on the other side is multiple colors, right? So it would be like if a prism could only, let out one color, if if it was able to refract the light in a certain way that only a certain shade was revealed, right? That's how the sky works, right? The sky, all of the light is refracted, and what remains is the blue light, or maybe the blue light is refracted, and that's what we see. I'm not a color expert or a light expert for that matter. But so that's all Kalim, right? Light is undefined, and Kalim give the definition. So continuing on 95 on the next page. So we're going to give a number of attempted answers. He does a good job in breaking down these attempted answers. Feel free to look at them on your own. If anybody sees anything that they're bothered by or that they have a question on, we can certainly address it. So it's true that when we have these vessels, when we're talking about vessels, the function of vessels are ultimately revealing, right? When we talk about the light that goes into the vessels, that there can be something like chachma, or something like chesed, something like wisdom, or like kindness, that there can be these distinct individual colors, these distinct individual elements. It's true that that is a revelatory experience, right? That shows us something and reveals something. Just like when it comes to the brain, right? The brain is ultimately a piece of flesh, right? The brain is ultimately just a piece of meat, but its function and its capacity, its ability is to take the intellect, which is something abstract, something spiritual, something without any substance to it, and it's able to take that thing and make it substantive, right? That we can engage with it, that we can experience it, that we can have a physical experience of something intellectual. So too with the eye, right? Vision is also something, the capacity for vision is also something spiritual, it's also something abstract or in some ways theoretical. It doesn't have a physical form to it. And the eye is the place in which that capacity for vision is realized in a physical way, that we can actually see things physically with our eyes. Bahalev, and so too with the heart, Magalas Amides, the heart reveals the emotions. So too above, in a spiritual element, in a godly plane, the same applies, that there is chachma, there is an intellectual capacity from what we understand, and there is a kindness element, that it's about revealing light. So just like in our soul, that there is the essence of our soul, and that reveals itself through the different spheres, through our different capacities, right? That we have our soul. The Kabbalists tell us that our soul, the way at least the essence of our soul stays, so to speak, above. But the parts of our soul that we engage with, so it's seated in our brain, and then it through our brain is meted out to the rest of our body. And so the energy of the soul, the vitality, the animus of the soul manifests in certain ways, so that the brain does something that the foot can't, and the eyes do something that the ears can't, and all of that is revelations, is expressions of the soul through these vessels that enclose and reveal certain elements of the soul, right? The soul is in some ways infinitely capable, right, in being totally perfect and being totally aligned. And it is through the vessels of our body, of each one of us uniquely and individually, that we each have different vessels that express our soul in certain ways, right? Our souls also have certain leanings, certain elements to them that make them unique and make them individual, but it's definitely manifest further by our body, by the unique kalim, the unique vessels that each one of us has, right? That you see people who play piano with their feet, right? And you're just like, how do they do that? So, right, so their soul is manifest in their feet in a more tactile way, in a more sophisticated way, maybe than mine are. Okay, anyways, moving on. 99. V'nei shneim emes. I think this is where we left off last time. These are both true, meaning to say, shehem megalim ha'ar v'gam ma'alim u'masdirim ha'ar. Masha megalim ha'ar hainu ar shelefi arach ha'elamas da'akelim da'asesvidus da'atzilus me'idim megalim ar sheba'elam atzilus. They have parsim afsakis ben atzilus l'bria. They have megalim ha'ar ba'elam abriya u'briya li'itzira. So he says both of these are true. Vessels, the kalim, serve two functions, and they do two things simultaneously. They both conceal and they reveal. The nature of any type of concealment is that it is also a revelation. Or in other words, whatever you cover over, whenever you highlight certain elements, while you are constraining that expression in certain ways, that constraint allows for engagement. When we think, our thoughts are very robust and they can be very sophisticated, and they can exist on multiple planes and with multiple, like with a real multiplicity to them. And then when we have to speak it out, all of a sudden we have to choose distinct, deliberate individual words that constrain that thought. Right? We can think about something in a very rich, robust way, and then when we have to share it, when we have to express it verbally, it becomes much more difficult. It becomes much more confining. Right? That's why we struggle to find the right word. Right? Because words are confining in that sense. But at the same time, that confinement, that constraint, is what allows us to reveal our thoughts. Right? You wouldn't know what I'm thinking if I don't speak it out. So everything is true, right? Clothes affect that same deal, right? Clothes cover over our body, but they also express things about us. They can express deeper truths about us, right? When you see a fireman and he's wearing his uniform, so then you know that he's somebody who would pull you out of a building, right? If he wasn't wearing the fireman clothing, you wouldn't know that he could pull you out of a burning building, right? So kalim, the vessels, affect both of that. So we left off over here because he sort of mentions as an aside that that these vessels exist in four worlds. So just to back up for a couple of minutes, Kabbalah tells us that there are four worlds, there are four realms, four stratas of consciousness. Right? These are not four locations, these are not four places, but they are four mindsets that we can inhabit, for experiences, for spiritual realities. So if we work from the bottom up, so this physical world as we relate to it in a material way is called the world of Atiyah, the world of action. And the next one up from there is the world of Yitzira. Yitzira means the world of formation. It is more spiritual. The following one above that is the world of Bria, the world of creation. And then above that is the world of Atzilus. Atzilus is in a lot of ways the most focused on in Kabbalah and in Chassidus, because it is the hardest one to understand. Atzilus, even the word Atzilus is hard to understand. There are a number of different meanings connected with the word Atzilus. Typically, I don't know if they translate it over here. Typically, Atzilus is translated as the world of emanation, if that wasn't vague enough. Atzilus also has a connotation of being next to. Being etzel in Hebrew is like za etzel za would mean like this is next to that. So Atzilus is the most aligned, the most godly, and then in a descending order from Bria Yetzira to Asiya, it's about how much self is felt, versus how much God is felt. So in Atzilus, it's next to God, so to speak, right? Obviously, there's no time and space in spirituality, so this isn't a physical location, but it is the world of emanation. God's eminence is there. God emanates into that reality, and that it is totally godly, it's totally aligned, it's one and the same. Then we have Bria. So there's this concept called the Parsa. The Parsa means a curtain. So there's between Atzilus and the three lower realms, Bria, Yetzira, and Asiya, there is a curtain. There is a curtain, there is a separation, there is a distinction between the singular reality of Atzilus. Atzilus is, in some ways, totally aligned, or in its essence, or functionally, is totally aligned with godliness. And so therefore, there's no sense of self felt there. No sense of distinction or disconnection felt there. The curtain distinguishes, separates between Atzilus and allows for there to be creation, allows for there to be sense of self. That's why the first world after the curtain is Bria, is the world of creation. That's where we begin to have a real separation between God and other. So you have Bria is the most aligned. We talk about the angels in Bria are angels that are totally aligned with godliness and are totally given over to their godly source. There's the language that's used is they're the ones that say kadosh, 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 right? We say that, we mentioned that in davening. So it's this, so we're echoing what the angels say, where they see that God is separate from them, but the separation is they're totally given over to godliness, even though they have a sense of self. That sense of self is totally aligned and it doesn't get in the way, right? Then we have the next world, Yetzira, where there's more sense of self, but they're still totally aligned, right? They still feel themselves, but they still at the same time recognize God, and they're still focused on God and focused on the singularity. So their sense of self doesn't get in the way. They don't have an ego, right? And then comes Asiya, comes this physical world where our sense of self is so totally out of whack that we have an ego, right? That we feel self-made, right? We say we can live in a reality, as the Torah tells us, that I can tell myself that my strengths and my abilities are what made myself, right? Well, a person can walk through this world and spend 70, 80, 90 years on this planet and not think about God, not think about their relationship with God. That's all a function of Asiya. That's a function of this physical world. So when it comes to the worlds, so every world has light, has the godly light, which is the energy, the animus, the vitality that is infusing it with existence. And then there's the kalim, there are the vessels, how much of the light is concealed, right? In Atzilus, it's all light. There's kalim, but the kalim themselves are also like reflecting the light. They're also expressing the same truth. Whereas when we come to this world, the kalim, the vessels are working, they're so intense, they cover over all the light, right? Whereas in a spiritual reality, we can be connected, we can be attuned, we can be aligned, we can have a moment where we recognize that we're totally dependent on God, we're totally unified with God, our essence is godly, and that God is the true existence. Or we can live in a physical realm, the Asiya world, where we can cut people off in traffic and tell ourselves that it's survival of the fittest and that it's a rat race, right? And that you can do whatever you want because we just got to get ahead. So so the way the vessels work is that they work in tandem with the nature of the world, right? So the vessels there's no hard and fast rule about vessels, about how much the vessel can reveal or conceal, right? The nature of being both a revealer and a concealer is that there is a gradation in some ways, a spectrum about how much of both of those things is going on simultaneously, right? Hainu Ersha Lupi Erchel, Mr. Hakelim Dasasiris Datzilis, Meirim Mugalim Ersha Belam Atzilis. Right, that in Atzilus, in this realm that's totally unified, that's totally aligned with God. So the vessels that work there, while they are concealing, they are all about revelation, because everything's about revelation there, because it's all godly, right? And it's important to mention too that when we talk about these realms, just like we're saying that they're not physical locations, so they are. It's not like this is foreign to us. It might be foreign language, but these are things that we in some ways experience, right? If you open the prayer books of the Kabbalists, so they'll identify certain parts of the prayer as being in the world of Atzilus or being in the world of Bria, right? So when we daven, when we do a mitzvah, when we connect to God, when we have a spiritual experience, when we really lose ourselves, when we really lose that sense of self, and we just feel connected, we just focus on our connection. So that's an Atzilus experience, or that can be a Bria experience, right? Depending on how much sense of self we still feel. So there is the reality that we inhabit that can be that we call Atzilus. Atzilus is all about revelation. And then there's the Parsa Mafsekes, Vayada'ata Parsa Mafsekes, through the medium of the Parsa, he says in the English, with probably a helpful footnote. So the curtain is required for there to be a quantum leap in sense of self to really facilitate the ability to feel self. That comes about in Bria, and that is through the function of the curtain. And then, so there's less light and there's more vessels, right? So they sort of compounds, right? As the worlds descend, there's less light, so there's quantitatively more light in Atzilus than there is in Asiya. And at the same time, there's also more vessels in Asiya than there is in Atzilus, right? There's more light and less vessels. The higher we are, the lower we go, there's more vessels and less light. You have a question?
Yeah, I do. Rabbi, how do these Kabbalists know about these four ways? For instance, I give you an example. Christopher Columbus,
Yeah.
in South America,
Mm.
Cuba. Now he went back to describe it to everyone in detail. Like, this is like detailed stuff. And also there's vessels per world that you describe it. So how do they know all about all?
So everything in Kabbalah, the word Kabbalah means that it was received, right? It means to receive. It's about a tradition that's transmitted. Kabbalah was historically what was radical about the Hasidic movement was that it was making teachings of Kabbalah accessible to people for the first time en masse. And that while the trajectory of Kabbalah had been to become more and more popular since, in some ways, the beginning of time, Hasidus really broke that mold and took it to the next level. The earliest Kabbalah Svarim we have, tradition tells us there's different traditions. Some say they go back to Avram Avinu, and some say they go back to Adam. But if not the book itself, the tradition was passed down from generation to generation since the earliest times, right? There's a yeshiva in Israel that we know of today that is known as the yeshiva of Shem and Aver, right? Who were Shem and Aver were people who were around from the earliest generations, right? Yaakov Avinu learned there, we're told. Jacob studied in that yeshiva. And they were studying the mystical elements. The first time it was really synthesized was in the Zohar. The other books like the Bar and the Sefer Yetzirah, other Kabbalah Svarim were passed down. Everything was passed down orally, just like all of Jewish tradition was passed down orally Rab Shimon Bar Yochai wrote the Zohar, and he was the first person to really codify a lot of Kabbalistic thought in the Zohar. But even the Zohar was really passed from teacher to student, and all of this was transmitted teacher to student. The only way we know anything is because it's a tradition. There is anything, all of these ideas in Kabbalah, there are verses that we have that substantiate them. There are verses that show and that validate these ideas. For example, the concept of the four worlds. Right, the four worlds are four worlds in and of themselves, whether we call them these names or not. These are the names that we use for them that show that describe certain qualities of them, but there are four worlds even without these names. But there's a verse, Barasav Yitzartiv, Afasisiv, it's mentioned in the end of Pirkei Avos. I don't know where the verse is from, off the top of my mind at least. But there's a verse that says, I created, I formed, and I also made, right? Which correspond to the three lower worlds of Bria, Yitzir, it's the same words. So whether we're using that terminology and whether that's sort of something that was created later, or whether those worlds are inherently called that, I'm not entirely sure, but I would imagine that the fact that this is the terminology that Kabbalists and that the Jewish people have been using going back to, the times of the Mishnah, if not further, shows that speaks to the essence of these worlds at the same time. But fundamentally, everything that we know is because of Masara, is because of tradition, is because there has been a mystical path that rabbis and scholars have been initiated in. And it was always on a very personal, like one-by-one basis. And when the Baal Shem Tov came along, the Arizal started to shift it in some ways. The Arizal lived in the 1500s in Tzfas, in the city of Tzfat in the north of Israel. And he, for the first time, he started sharing more Kabbalah with the people than had previously been done. Tzfat was a very mystical town. It's still very mystical, but at the time it was like crazy mystical, and everybody there was into Kabbalah, and everybody there was even the simple people were like around these Kabbalists, and there were Kabbalistic practices and thoughts that were permeating the Jewish experience up there. Right, that's where Kabbalah Shabbat was invented. Right, this idea of welcoming in Shabbos by singing special psalms. That's a Kabbalistic notion that permeated all of Jewish experience around the world. So different things like that began to become more commonplace, and that was a lot had to do with the Arizal. But then when the Baal Shem Tov came around in the 1700s, that's when it really, when the doors really flew open and Kabbalah permeated the masses. Does that answer your question? Okay. Okay, so we have these different vessels, the different worlds, and this is to say that when we talk about these different worlds, there is a qualitative difference in being in one world versus in the other world, right? There is a qualitative difference in having a sense of self that is our primary operating place, right? That I feel myself first and God second, versus being in a place where I feel God first and myself second, right? So that's the difference. Well, the second paragraph on page 99, so we can't say that there is at any point is this just revealing the light in and of itself, or the way the light is, because the light is totally infinite, right? If it's totally infinite, then there would be no room for any type of sense of self. There would be no room for any other, right? There's no conversation to be had. So there has to be vessels that are concealing this light, that are constraining it in some way, that are making room for something else here. It could be in an Atzilus way, where everything is still totally aligned, where everything is totally unified and singular, or it can be in an Asiya way, where we cut each other off in traffic and it's a dog-eat-dog world. So because of that, the light itself, is not relative to the worlds. It is in some ways not even, it is not comparable, or it doesn't consider the worlds, because the light is totally singular. So light is light. Light being this godly energy, right? The light is the analogy that Kabbalists prefer to express how godly energy manifests. So we refer to it as light, but keep in mind that it's not the light from the light bulb. So the light is simple, the light is singular. It doesn't change, right? So it doesn't, if it's in the highest world or whether it's in the lowest world, it doesn't make a difference. It's still light. It's the vessels that change the quality of the experience, that constrain it in a way that there can be more sense of self, that there can be more individuality or separation, or less individuality and separation. Because for it to be a world means that it's separate. A world means that it is a realm in and of itself, that there are parameters to its consciousness, and that it is inhabited, or that its inhabitants have, and there is definition, right? The word world in Hebrew is olam, right? Olam comes from the same word as halam, which means to conceal. So each world, for it to be this world and not that world, means that there is a element of its concealment that is different than that concealment, right? For there to be the world of Atzilus, the concealment within Atzilus, the concealment of Atzilus is different qualitatively than the concealment of Asiya, this physical world, right? And so each one of those has its own definitions, its own limitations, right? The limitations of this world can be physical, and then there can be spiritual realms where its limitations are spiritual. It still has definition. Like it says, like the Alter Rebbe writes in Tanya. Surely this is a good time to plug that this Thursday we are starting a Tanya class at 7 p.m. upstairs. And if you want to, it's 6 weeks. And if you want to join, let me know, and I can give you all the relevant information. Okay. So just like in Atzilus, we have that there's limitation, there's definition. So too, all the more so in these lower worlds after the curtain, where self is the primary orientation and God is secondary. There's all the more so is their definition and limitation. So this is to say that the light does not consider the worlds. It doesn't consider where it is, right? Light is light, it's simple and it's pure, and it doesn't take into consideration where it is being manifested. Even can move on. So if that's the case, then it's understood the Mashakil Magalam Arba Ilamus Ein Zebchina Atzama Arki Im Bchinas Ha'ara Chitzenius Levad Mimanu. So that tells us that when we say that the vessel contains, but it also reveals, so that means that it's not revealing. It doesn't express the essence of the light, but rather it is expressing the term he uses is the chitzenius of the light, something external, something superficial of the light. There is the light itself that reflects, that expresses the essence of the luminary, that is an extension of the luminary, that contains all the same truths of the luminary, which would mean that just like God is infinite, the light, the energy that is being exuded, that is being effused, is also infinite, is also simple and totally singular. So the light, the vessel being able to contain that light, when it reveals, just like speech contains and reveals, or constrains and reveals rather, so it expresses something very superficial, right? Relative to how deep and robust our thoughts are, speech is very superficial. Speech is very limited in the same capacity, right? We can think about something in a very rich, robust way, and it can be in total detail, and we can think about it sophisticatedly and with all sorts of different elements to our thoughts, and think about different ways and different things. And then when we have to talk it out, when we have to speak it, when we have to articulate that thought, we find ourselves very constrained. And I think oftentimes we can have an experience where we don't feel like we're doing our thoughts justice in the ways in which we're speaking, the ways in which we're articulating them. Hard to talk about talking. So imke moving the masha akela megalamas arba elamas ain't bechina atzam arki bechina ha'arach etzenis levadimim. So therefore, so the same is true in this vessels, in how we understand this interplay between light and vessels, that what is being revealed, but through the vessel constraining the light, is superficial. But the essence of the light's essential nature, its essential being, is hidden. It can't be revealed. It's beyond revelation. Shehem Ma'alimim olav, it's concealed by them, by the vessels. Vayidei zeh shema'alimim al etzem ha'ar harehem magalim es chetzenius ha'ar sheyar v'yipol ba'ilmus. And that in some ways, what ends up happening is that because the essence is concealed, that enables, that facilitates there to be that the superficiality, the externalities of it can be revealed, right? If I had to share my thoughts with you, it would be overwhelming because I have so many thoughts going on, and because it's so multi-layered and complex, and it's such a composition that to share that the way it is by me would be overwhelming for you, right? Just like if we start to, share too much of ourselves, if we start to expose too much of ourselves, if we start to share our deepest thoughts and feelings, and we start to, let it all hang out, that the other person can sometimes feel overwhelmed by that. So all the more so when it comes to the way thought is by a person, to share our thoughts would be overwhelming. And so what speech enables in concealing the essence of the thought, allowing for only the externalities, the superficialities of the thought to be revealed, is what makes it palatable, is what makes it engageable, right? That makes it that we can have a conversation and we can share thoughts and ideas, and we're not just like blowing each other away with intensity, right? That's where the vessel, where the concealment comes in, to allow for the other person's experience. So it comes out, moving to Shneim Emes, that both of these concepts are true. So it can conceal the essence of the light, and it can reveal the externalities of the light. And so they in fact work in tandem, and they're one and the same. That a concealment is a revealment or a revelation. That to conceal, to constrain, to define allows for that definition, allows for it to be shared, allows for the other to engage with it. That when we speak, we conceal our thoughts, but then that's the tool, that's the vehicle that allows for speech to be the intersection between two people sharing ideas. And he gives an example on the bottom of page 106. What's the proof for this? What's the analogy? Is speech. Speech relative to our thoughts, but especially when we talk about speech relative to our intellect, right? Our intellect being our fundamental capacity for understanding, for extrapolation, for intuition and insight. All of those are intellectual capacities. So when we think about the intensity of something like extrapolation or insight, trying to articulate that is totally superficial relative to the intensity of insight. Does everybody know the story of Archimedes with Eureka? No? So Archimedes was this physicist, right? He was a scientist. He lived in Greece. And he was tasked by the king to weigh his throne, his golden throne. And it was this big, massive throne. And it was too big to fit on a scale. So the king came to Archimedes and asked him to come up with a way to weigh it, to know how much it weighed. And he spent days and days in his workshop, in his studio, in his office, thinking about a way to weigh it, to measure its weight. And he couldn't come up with anything. It was totally confounding. And then one day he went to take a bath, and he noticed when he got into the bath that when he got in, the water came out, he displaced the water, and he figured out that the amount of water that he displaced was relative to his own body weight. And he wasn't able to immediately say, my weight displaces water relative to my body weight. He realized that he had the insight, this flash of insight to realize that this was the way this solved the problem. And so the story goes that he began running through I forget what town he lived in Greece, but one of these ancient Greek towns, and he was running through the town naked, screaming Eureka, saying, I figured it, I found it, right? So that's the essence of what insight, what Chokhmah is about, right? That's the Chokhmah experience. And all he could say was Eureka, I found it, because he couldn't articulate it, right? The articulation of it is to speak that out, to share that. Once he finally, figured out the formula and presented it to the king and showed the people how to build a tank that they could put the throne into and measure the water that was displaced in order to figure out how much the throne weighed. All of that articulation is in some ways totally superficial, is totally external to the initial moment of Eureka, or even prior to Eureka, when he has that insight moment, when he's running through the town naked. So that's the same deal. That's this relationship between the light and the vessels, right? The light of realizing, the light of insight is so intense, is so overwhelming that a person can totally lose themselves and run through the town naked because they're in their head, they're inhabiting a different reality. To then speak it out, to be able to constrain that passion and that intensity of that thought, of that intellectual experience into thought and then into speech, to be able to articulate it with another is relative to that intensity totally superficial. So that's what we're saying here, the relationship between the light and the vessels. So the speech, the way we talk it out, the way we articulate it, fundamentally can't be as passionate, can't be as intense. That's the nature of being able to reveal something, is that it's part and parcel with that concealment. So we also see this in the judges of the courts of the Sanhedrin. they would stay up all night discussing the case and talking about both sides of it. V'hagam shahayu. Let's we'll leave it over here for now. Because he's going to start to go into a different idea. But to say that they would, the conversation and the nature of speech is that talk is cheap, and that talk is cheap can be a tool that we use to express the essence of our thought or of our intellect, and that's and it might be an unfortunate reality, but it is also it also helps us to be able to convey that, right? It helps us. It's a tool that we can use to convey those thoughts, the intensity of that thought and of that intellectual experience. That if talk weren't cheap, if it didn't conceal the essence of the thought or of the intellectual experience, the essence of the insight or of the extrapolation, so then we wouldn't be able to interface with each other. And this, within every experience, the way the Kabbalists perceive every interaction, every interface in this world is having this light and vessel, this revelation and this concealment. All of that is always at play, and it's a lens through which we can perceive every interpersonal experience, every interaction we have with God, every way that we articulate and express ourselves. All that is a tool that we can see existence expressing itself on a different strata, and that helps us to understand a little bit how we perceive God's presence in this world. Right? Ultimately, what we're doing here is trying to cultivate a sensitivity to develop more language and more understanding around perceiving godliness and how godliness is manifest and expressing itself, how it's vitalizing and animating all of existence. And the more that we push ourselves to explore these different analogies and these different concepts and the different ways in which revelation and concealment can be working in tandem and equal and opposite, and all of that helps us to live ultimately a more godly reality and being more sensitive to that. So thank you everybody for joining. You can hang on to this, or I'm happy to take it back. And God willing, we'll see you all next week.